A young man stands at an airport security line in 1970, Bible in his hand. The guard flips through it lazily, sees pages, sees print, hands it back. What he doesn't see is that the center of that Bible has been carefully cut out, and inside sits a small paperback the French government has just banned. A book written by a black psychiatrist who died at 36. A book so unsettling, it was smuggled in hollowed-out books under car seats across borders. A book that turned college students into revolutionaries and put its author on CIA watch lists. While nightly news in the US showed images of Vietnam, civil rights marches, and burning cities, the people on those streets were often reading this man's words. His name was Frantz Fanon, and his final message to the colonized world was blunt. Your chains are not just on your body, they're in your mind. And the people who rule you are more afraid of you than you have ever been of them. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand why governments moved so quickly to silence him, and why, 6 decades later, his ideas are still quietly shaping protests, police critiques, and liberation movements around the world. This is Black Stories Untold, where we uncover the thinkers and leaders empires tried to erase. If you were alive to see the civil rights movement on your TV, you'll recognize just how close this story runs to events you remember. Let's go back to where it begins. Juillet 1925, Fort-de-France, Martinique, an island in the Caribbean, officially part of France but treated as a plantation outpost. Frantz Fanon is born into a black middle-class family. His parents believe in education, discipline, hard work. They save money to send him to the island's elite school, Lycée Victor Schulze. Walk into that classroom with him. Every morning, rows of black children stand and recite in unison, "Our ancestors, the Gauls." They memorize French kings and European battles, while the history of their own enslaved ancestors, on that very soil, goes unmentioned. Speak Creole, the language your family uses at home, and the teacher snaps, "Use proper French." Task about African history, and you're told it's primitive, unimportant, something to be forgotten if you want to be civilized. This is not just education, it's psychological training, teaching black children to see themselves through French eyes, to be ashamed of their roots and proud of their colonizers. One teacher refuses to play along. Aimé Césaire, poet and later mayor of Fort-de-France, begins telling his students something radical for the time. Your blackness is not a defect. Your culture is not a mistake. You are not failed Frenchmen. You are something else entirely, and that has value. Césaire calls it negritude, a movement of black pride and cultural affirmation. The idea lodges in young Fanon's mind like a seed, but a seed like that doesn't grow without a shock. Martinique is drawn into the Second World War. When Nazi Germany defeats France, the collaborationist Vichy regime takes over the island. Overnight, the polite mask of French civilization comes off. French officers patrol the streets, censorship, curfews, food shortages, open humiliation of black islanders who had been told they were equal citizens of France. 15-year-old Fanon watches the contradiction up close. The same people who preach liberty and equality overseas enforce racism and domination at home. 2 years later, he does what many colonized young men did in that era. He volunteers to fight for the very empire that looks down on him. At 17, Fanon joins the Free French forces. He ships out to North Africa and then to Europe, believing he is fighting fascism in the name of human dignity. In the forests of Alsace, he's wounded by shrapnel. He earns the Croix de Guerre for bravery. French officers pin a medal to his chest, then bar him from the officers' mess because of his skin color. Even in victory, the hierarchy holds. When France prepares its grand victory parades, Charles de Gaulle orders black troops removed from the front lines. The photographs of liberation must show white faces only. The men who bled for France watch their own victory from the sidewalk. From Europe, Fanon writes a letter to his brother Joby. "I've been deceived and I am paying for my mistakes. I'm sick of it all." That sentence marks a turning point. The loyal French soldier dies in that moment. In his place is born the man who will dedicate his life to exposing how colonialism gets inside people's heads. After the war, Fanon returns to France and enrolls in medical school at the University of Lyon, specializing in psychiatry. His patients are not just shell-shocked veterans. Many are North African migrant workers, Algerians, suffering breakdowns in a society that treats them as a permanent underclass. At the time, French psychiatric journals publish degrading theories about native minds. One influential colonial psychiatrist, Antoine Porot, claims Algerians are biologically impulsive, emotionally unstable, and intellectually inferior. If an Algerian man is depressed or violent, that's simply his race. Fanon sees something else in his consulting room. Men crushed under the weight of constant insult. Workers who can't sleep because they're terrified of losing their job and being sent back to poverty. Patients who drink not because they're primitive, but because they're trying to numb the wounds of daily humiliation. The society is diseased, but the doctors are blaming the victims. Fanon writes his doctoral thesis on how colonialism itself produces mental illness, how living as a second-class human under constant racist pressure warps the psyche. His thesis is rejected as too political. So in 1952 he publishes it as a book, Peau Noire, Masque Blanc, Black Skin, White Masks. In it he describes a pattern he has seen again and again. Black men and women who learn to wear a white mask just to move through a white-dominated world. They change their speech, their walk, their tastes. They laugh along with racist jokes. They scrub their skin, straighten their hair, abandon their own names, all in the hope of being treated as almost equal. But inside the cost is enormous. Self-hatred, a constant split between who they are and who they think they must pretend to be. Fanon's argument is simple and devastating. The problem is not that black people are broken. The problem is a system that demands they break themselves in order to be accepted. Across the Caribbean and Africa, people pass around copies. Some hide it in Bible covers to avoid attracting attention. Study groups gather in back rooms and dormitories to read it aloud. For many, it is the first time someone has put into words the discomfort they've always felt, living in a world that sees them as lesser. Fanon has exposed the psychological machinery of colonialism. But he's not content to observe it from a distance. He wants to confront it where it is most naked. Algeria. France has ruled this North African country for more than a century. Over 1 million European settlers live there. Millions of Algerian Muslims are treated as strangers in their own land. Fanon arrives as head psychiatrist at Blida-Joinville Hospital, just outside Algiers. The contrast is stark. French neighborhoods have stone houses, running water, electricity, cafes. Algerian quarters are deliberately underdeveloped, what Fanon will call a town on its knees. No proper sanitation, crumbling huts, children suffering from hunger and disease. Inside the hospital, Fanon finds a psychiatric system that tries to cure Algerian patients by forcing them into French norms. He does the opposite. He opens a small cafe on the hospital grounds so patients can sit, drink coffee and talk together, in Arabic as well as French. He organizes workshops in weaving, pottery, carpentry, giving patients a chance to rebuild a sense of purpose. He marks Muslim and Christian holidays with equal respect. He is trying to prove something simple. You don't heal people by erasing who they are. But then the war comes. On November 1st, 1954, a group called the National Liberation Front, the FLN, launches coordinated attacks across Algeria. Bridges, police posts, farms. The Algerian War of Independence begins. Violence escalates quickly. French troops and police torture suspected rebels. Villages are bombed. People disappear into prisons and interrogation centers. Fanon's waiting room fills with two kinds of patients. On one side, Algerian men and women who have been beaten, electrocuted, threatened. Some cannot speak, some cannot sleep, some wake screaming. On the other side, French soldiers and policemen who have participated in those interrogations and now suffer nightmares, shaking fits, sudden rages. One policeman tells Fanon he is becoming dangerous to his own family. He beats his wife and children after long days of questioning Algerian suspects. He doesn't want to stop the torture. He wants help so he can keep doing it without suffering himself. Fanon realizes something chilling. In a colonial war, psychiatry becomes part of the machinery. It can either soothe the consciences of torturers or recognize that the real illness is the system. He chooses the second path. By 1956, he cannot stand the hypocrisy of serving the French state while treating the Algerian victims of that state. He writes a letter of resignation that is more like an indictment. There comes a time when silence becomes dishonesty, he declares, denouncing French colonial rule in Algeria as a system based on racism and violence. The French government expels him from the country. He's given 48 hours to leave. They think they've neutralized a troublesome doctor. They haven't. They've just turned him into a full-time revolutionary. Fanon goes to Tunis in neighboring Tunisia, where the FLN operates in exile. He joins them openly. He becomes editor of their newspaper, El Mujahid, writing articles that explain the war not only as a struggle for land, but as a fight for dignity and sanity. He also takes on a new mission, diplomacy. The FLN sends him across Africa to build alliances. In Accra, he meets Ghana's Kwame Nkrumah. In Conakry, Guinea's Sékou Touré. In the Congo, Patrice Lumumba. In Cameroon, Félix Moumié. At the All-African People's Conference in 1958, Fanon argues passionately for a united African front, an African legion that could coordinate liberation struggles from Algeria to South Africa. For European powers, this is a nightmare scenario. A continent sharing not just weapons but consciousness. French intelligence responds by trying to eliminate him. Near the Algeria-Tunisia border, a landmine explodes under his car. 12 vertebrae are fractured. He survives barely. Other attempts follow. His body is weak. He walks with difficulty, but he keeps flying from capital to capital, building connections, writing reports, and arguing that the end of colonial rule must mean more than changing flags. It must mean changing minds. Then, late in 1960, doctors give him a different kind of news. Leukemia terminal. He is 35. Faced with death, many would retire quietly. Fanon decides to race the clock. He has seen colonialism from the classroom, the battlefield, the hospital, the torture room, and the diplomatic table. He wants to put it all down, clear, unsparing, and useful, for those who will still be fighting when he is gone. The result will be his most famous book, Spring 1961 Tunis. Fanon is in a hospital bed, weakened by the disease and by the after-effects of the landmine attack. His wife Josie sits beside him with a notebook. He speaks, she writes. For 3 months, through pain and exhaustion, he dictates the manuscript that will become Les Damnés de la Terre, the Wretched of the Earth. The opening line is not a plea. It's a statement. Decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. Fanon explains that colonialism did not arrive with reasoned debate and legal documents. It arrived with ships, guns, bayonets, chains. It maintained itself not by persuasion, but by force, police, prisons, and the constant threat of death. So when colonized people rise up, he argues, they are not introducing violence into history. They are responding to violence that has been there all along. Then he makes the claim that still makes people uncomfortable. For those who have been treated as less than human, organized resistance, even armed resistance, can have a cleansing effect on the mind. He writes, violence is a cleansing force. It frees the native from his inferiority complex and from his despair and inaction. It makes him fearless and restores his self-respect. He is not celebrating savagery. He is describing what he's seen, a peasant strike, a village that refuses to pay taxes, a group of young men and women who by joining the struggle stop believing they are powerless. The point is not bloodlust. The point is rebirth, recovering the sense that you are a subject of history, not an object of someone else's rule. French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre reads the manuscript and writes a preface that turns an already explosive book into something authorities find genuinely frightening. Addressing European readers, Sartre writes, "To shoot down a European is to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, to destroy an oppressor and the man he oppresses at the same time." When The Wretched of the Earth is published in France in 1961, it is immediately banned. The government understands this is not a polite critique. It is a manual for dismantling colonial rule, psychologically and politically. But banning only fuels demand. Copies are smuggled into Algeria, across Africa, throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, and eventually into the United States. While Fanon's words travel, his body fails. He manages one last trip to Rome to meet Sartre. Then, through a secret arrangement, he's brought to the United States under the name Ibrahim Omar Fanon for advanced leukemia treatment at a hospital in Maryland. The CIA is aware of who he really is. Files are opened. Some argue bureaucratic delay in his treatment cost him precious time. Others suggest he was never meant to leave that hospital alive. What we know is that on December 6, 1961, Frantz Fanon dies. He is 36 years old. 7 months later, Algeria becomes independent. He never walks the streets of a free Algiers. but his words are already walking on their own. If you were a college student or young activist in the late 1960s or early 70s, you may have seen his name on a bookshelf without realizing who he was. In Oakland, a young Huey P. Newton is given a copy of The Wretched of the Earth by Bobby Seale. The newly formed Black Panther Party makes Fanon's work mandatory reading. Fanon's description of the police in the colonial world as an occupying army sent to keep a population in its place strikes a chord. When Panthers start arming themselves and patrolling the police in Oakland, reading law books as they follow officers' cars, they are putting Fanon's analysis into action. If you are treated like a colonized population, organize like one. In South Africa, a young medical student named Steve Biko reads Fanon and is electrified. Biko's Black consciousness movement is built on a Fanonian foundation. You cannot dismantle apartheid only by changing laws. You must change how Black South Africans see themselves. Before you fight the system in the streets, you must kill the system in your mind. In Palestine, Fanon becomes required reading in certain circles. His descriptions of settler colonialism, where an incoming population claims the land and pushes the native population to the margins, feel eerily familiar. In Latin America and parts of Asia, guerrilla movements copy passages into their notebooks. Some disagree with him, some misread him. But almost all serious anti-colonial leaders of the 60s and 70s know his name. Even in countries that claim colonialism is in the past, Fanon's analysis refuses to go away. In France, his case studies of torture in Algeria forced the nation to confront what it did in the name of civilization. In the United States, his framework maps uncomfortably well onto segregation, redlining, and mass incarceration. Read his description of a colonial city, well-serviced European quarters and neglected native slums, and it is hard not to think of American cities divided by race and wealth. When you watch footage from the late 1960s, police dogs in Birmingham, tanks in Detroit, National Guardsmen in Newark, it's hard to miss the similarity to the role of colonial forces he described in Algeria. And the resonance doesn't end there. When protests erupted in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014 after the shooting of Michael Brown, some marchers carried signs quoting Fanon, lines written more than half a century earlier, now applied to a different kind of line separating police and community. Today, many universities teach Fanon as part of post-colonial theory, a phrase that can make him sound distant, academic, finished. Seminars pick apart his style, debate his influences, analyze his metaphors. But if you read him the way the Panthers, Biko, or Algerian fighters did, he is not a museum piece. He is a man staring you in the eye and saying, "You are not what this system says you are." Your despair is not a personal failing. Your confusion is not madness. It is the logical response of a human being trapped in a dehumanizing structure, and you do not have to ask politely for your humanity back. The personal cost of that message was enormous. After Fanon's death, his wife Josie stayed in Algeria through the turbulent years after independence, years marked by internal power struggles, coups, and disappointments that many former colonies experienced. She battled depression and addiction. In 1989, she took her own life. Their children, Mireille and Olivier, have worked to preserve and expand their father's legacy. The Frantz Fanon Foundation and the Frantz Fanon National Association keep his archives, publish his lesser-known writings, and support people working where psychiatry, racism, and politics meet. Why does all this still matter to someone in the United States today? Especially if you're in your 50s or 60s, with your own clear memories of the 1960s and 70s. Because Fanon offers a bridge between what you saw then and what you see now. He helps explain why certain patterns repeat, why some neighborhoods always seem to be under control, why policing so often feels like occupation rather than protection, why debates about law and order sound so similar to colonial talk about pacifying the natives. And he offers something else, a reminder that mental liberation, the refusal to accept someone else's definition of your worth, is not a luxury. It is the foundation of any real change. He insisted on a truth that still makes those in power uneasy. You do not need permission to be human. You do not need your oppressor's approval to demand freedom. Frantz Fanon never led an army or held public office. His weapon was a sharp mind and a refusal to lie about what he saw. The French state banned his books. Intelligence agencies tracked him. His enemies hoped his death at 36 would close the chapter. It didn't. Every time someone in South Africa, or Oakland, or Gaza, or Paris opens the Wretched of the Earth or Black Skin, white masks, and recognizes their own experience on the page, they prove that the man died, but the questions he raised did not. They can kill the revolutionary. They can't kill the revolution of the mind. If this story helped connect some of the dots between the world you remember and the one we're living in now, don't let it stop here. Share it with someone who might recognize these echoes too. And in the comments, tell us, which buried thinker, movement, or moment from our history should we uncover next? This is Black Stories Untold. The more of these stories we bring back into the light, the harder it becomes for anyone to pretend they never happened.